It's the 20th of September 2021. Welcome everybody. I'm Dana Durnford, the nuclearproctologist.org, and you can call in 24/7. And right now when we're live, it's 709-589-4406. 709-589-4406. I just had to restart my equipment, so a few minutes late. I'm normally never early, never late. Probably 8 times in the last 7-8 years. That I've actually been late. Not much you can do. Yeah, the system froze up on me. You don't pay the big dollars so it can freeze up on you. Let's get into it. Lethal radiation levels detected in Fukushima nuke plant reactor lid. They're talking about reactor 2. Now remember, 7 years to get into the control room, but they're into the nuclear meltdown. 7 years. Do you get it? What's going on here? It's a glazy industry. Comes with a video. Doesn't get any better than that. I like videos. Some of the pictures I'd done screen captures. Some of it came out blurry. What you're looking at in the background here is number 1 reactor. Right alongside it is number 2. Now the link is below. If you go down and watch the video, it looks like they're walking into reactor 2. They're hard cases, eh? And they came out blurry, unfortunately. So do you see the handrails? And you see a guy's hand right there. If you watch the video, you see him going up a step. They're right alongside of. But they don't tell you what they're doing, but it gives you the impression they're actually going in the reactor too. And you see them checking their face mask. Everything that you would expect from, if you don't know any better, right? You assume they're actually gone in the reactor too. They're such a sneaky bunch, eh? And then there's all kinds of construction equipment, and then they got a robot there. So you really think you're at reactor. It gives the impression that they're at reactor 2, and everything is hunky-dory, right? It's just a normal day, except there's a spot there where they can't go to. There's some hard cases. Well, first off, if you were going to put a reactor in the number 2, you ain't going in the building or near it, for starters. And it's not going to look anything like the pictures they're showing. It's a liquefied reactor core. It went China syndrome, went straight down into the earth at 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. And you're talking about 700 ton plus reactor core. And so what they're allegedly doing is they got a little tiny hole drilled a few centimeters, they're claiming, into the lid. And this, I'll show you a diagram coming up. These hard cases, boy. So this one is supposed to be reactor 4 to your right. And so the fuel pool over there, this reactor 2 is the same design. So this is 190 feet up in the air. Right? The top of the building. So they're claiming in this picture here that they're coming out of reactor 4. And this is ground level reactor 4. This is all that's left of it, about 30 feet. So they faked the reactor 4, they faked the reactor 3. There's some hard cases. Now they're going to fake reactor 2. That's reactor 3. And I'll give you a picture of reactor 3. Now they're claiming they're at the fuel pool at the top of the building. And once again, that's reactor 3. And the fuel pool at the top of the building up there, you got to be up 190 feet to look down on it. It doesn't actually exist, right? And this was the mixed oxide fuel. So now they're going to fake reactor 2. It's no big surprise, right? They faked reactor 4, and now they faked reactor 3. Now they're going to fake reactor 2. So they're claiming, and now your camera's not going to work in this environment for starters. There's some hard cases. Nuclear regulation authorities use 2 remotely controlled robots to measure radiation near the shield plug of the number 2 reactor. A remotely controlled robot inserts a dosimeter into a hole created, is not a Geiger counter, but a dosimeter, to measure radiation levels beneath the uppermost lid of the number 2 reactor. They're 300,000 plus pounds, by the way, those lids. In a study. The Nuclear Regulation Authority, which there is no regulation authority, or nuclear couldn't exist, that a radiation reading near the surface of the lid was 1.2 sieverts per hour, higher than levels previously assumed. And discovery came on September 9 during a study. TEPCO plans to insert a robotic arm to number 2 reactor vessel from the side in a trial in the second half of 2022 to retrieve pieces of the melted nuclear fuel. This will make sense when we get through it here. We will consider what we can do during the trial on the basis of detections of concentration and contamination in the upper area of the containment vessel. The containment vessel is not intact, as you'll see. In the upper area of the containment vessel, the round cement lid, called a shield plug, 12 meters, is over 36 feet, and 60 centimeters thick, and then weighs 150 tons, which is 330,000 pounds. The shield plug consists of 3 lids placed on top of each other to block extremely high radiation emanating from the reactor core. The building actually blew up and burnt for days, right? When operators work on the decommissioning, the shield plug will be removed to allow for the entry into the containment vessel, where the reactor core used to be. So again, they faked reactor 4, faked reactor 3, now they're going to fake the reactor 2. And the kooks said that a huge amount of radioactive cesium was released during the meltdown of number 2 reactor, during the meltdown of that same reactor. Which means if it melts down, it's 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures, and it goes straight to the core like butter, through the containment like butter. So they're claiming now that cesium is what's causing, my God, boy. You got to keep that lie alive for 75 years, that the only thing you should worry about is cesium. The biggest byproduct of radiated fuel rods is curium. That's why they call it a curium core, right? And for curium, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. Number 2 reactor building. And so the red dot is the plug they're talking about. At the very, very top of the building. They're claiming they're up at the very top of the building. Shield plug for a reactor. Containment vessel is right here. Pressure vessel. Melted nuclear fuel. They're claiming is only at the very bottom. This is a perpetual lie that has been going on for a long time, where they claim the fuel just magically stops. It doesn't work that way. And so they got 2 robots there. They're claiming they're at the top of reactor 2. These are actual lunatics. These are very dangerous too, lunatics. When radiation reading was 1.2 sieverts per hour, 4 centimeters down the surface of the lid. The findings suggest the actual dose would likely be dozens of sieverts per hour, thus far more dangerous. Well, first off, as they even admitted it in the article, you got a melted reactor core. Melted reactor core. They're claiming, though, it's still inside the vessel. So it's got no water, it's melted down. It's going to be a million sieverts or something like that. It can't just be dozens of sieverts. It's a melted reactor core, for goodness sakes. While it is expected to be a huge challenge to dismantle the lid, there's 3 of them on top of each other. TEPCO has yet to decide what to do with them during the decades-long cleanup work. Well, apparently they're going to ship them to another country for recycling into pots and pans and bumpers and spoons and stuff. That story's coming up. Okay, so startling secret revealed. Fukushima evidence feared that Reactor 3 would break apart after signs Reactor 2 vessel was destroyed. And 90% of the workers fled the plant in mass desertion. Author on Japanese TV, it's almost as if TEPCO officials are aliens from another planet. I think they're actually probably right, unfortunately. Japanese discuss personal health problems. 7 people died on a shopping street in Fukushima City. Have you got a street in your town where 7 people dropped dead? Radiation levels of several dozens of sieverts possible near the reactor. 2. The radiation levels of over 5,000 sieverts. So that's because it's leaked out of the building, so that one spot there was 5,000 sieverts. Imagine what it's actually going to be if it stayed in the containment, which we know it didn't, by the way. Okay, so steam coming out of the ground is 4.7 sieverts, but the lid is only 1.2 sieverts. Steam coming out of the ground in one spot is 20% more than it was in June. $475. Hang on. La 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 la. Da, 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 da. Fukushima reactor site engulfed by steam or something like steam near Unit 3. But Unit 3 is right by Unit 2. Now, Unit 3 doesn't have a China syndrome. I'll show you why. It doesn't have a China syndrome because it went off like a firecracker and it shot its load. I'll show you a video if you want me to. We have the technology to show you a video. We just got to find the video. Bear with me. Is that it there, Dana? Let's check it. So here's Reactor 3. It's not China syndrome. No, that's Reactor 1, Dana. I know, that's weird, eh? Hang on. In Reactor 1, fuel pool didn't go China syndrome, but the reactor core did. That's the fuel pool blowing up on the other side of Reactor 1. Here's the other side of Reactor 2, rather. So you had Reactor 3 blow up, and there goes the fuel pool in the reactor core. Now it's falling back down to the earth. See it? And the buildings in the bottom center of the screen are 190 feet high. Here's Reactor 1 on the other side of it, of Unit 2, blowing up. And so the China syndrome is Reactor 3. So 4.7 sieverts an hour coming out of the ground. This is increased. It's been going on for months and months and months, right? But there's 6 places there. So it's not Unit 3 that's doing this, because Unit 3 went up, and when China melted down in the air, it went pyrophoric and caught fire. So 6 places, the steam coming out of the ground is 10 sieverts an hour. But they're claiming a nuclear meltdown inside the building, it's only 1.2 sieverts. But outside the building, just the air is 10 sieverts an hour. But by the way, the Geiger counters they're using, they max out at 10 sieverts an hour. So they wanted a suicide corp. This is a suicide corp they sent in. We can't vent Unit 2. This is like the end. That was a Fukushima tape. So radiation near reactor 1, and I showed you that explosion, was over 200 sieverts per hour near the building. Imagine what's going to be like in the building, see? So, fatal radiation levels found at Fukushima exceeded 10 sieverts per hour. So the steam that you've seen, I showed you the video actually, that's 40 times the normal speed. The whole site disappears in steam, which means everything's now 10 sieverts an hour, but you're talking about hundreds of thousands of sieverts. Because when you dump a liter in a bucket, that's 2 sieverts. When you dump another liter in the bucket, that's another 2 sieverts. Now it's 4 sieverts. You put another liter in the bucket, that's 6 sieverts. See how the steam works the same way. 200 sieverts per hour near reactor 1, that's on one side of it. Fatal levels all over the place. TEPCO unsure how to access areas. Radiation levels around it are 10 sieverts per hour. They're talking about those towers. They're talking about those towers you see there, those white stacks. They're over 10 to 25 sieverts per hour. But in the nuclear meltdown itself is only 1.2 sieverts per hour. That's crazy. Fatal levels all over the site. Fracture-like traces found on steel bracing at Unit 1 and 2 exhaust stacks are over 10 sieverts. But inside the nuclear meltdown is only 1.2 sieverts, Dana. Oh, it's 1 million sieverts outside of Unit 1, which is right alongside of Unit 2. That's what I mean. Like, in the description below I wrote, I've never, ever caught the nuclear industry telling the truth a single time. And we've been doing this for years and years and years. We've never had a story where, holy shit, they told the truth. We've never seen that happen from any story around the entire planet, ever. Where the whole story was nothing but the truth. You always caught them with a bunch of lies, right? Deadly Easter eggs generating radiation higher than 10 sieverts per hour. It's a strange way to connotation. 2 sieverts beta radiation emitted from a single liter of leaked water, but the nuclear reactor cores are only 1.2 sieverts at the top of the buildings, Dana. Water above a sievert an hour. 2 more spots appear to be above 10 sieverts per hour. 3.6 sieverts an hour near a rainwater drain pipe. But inside the building, right at the top of the nuclear meltdown, Dana, it's only 1.2 sieverts per hour. Come on, man. As the public, possibly worldwide, sickens over time, the truth will come out about Fukushima. As the public, possibly worldwide, which means all the species too, right? By the way, I got another die-off video ready to go, believe it or not. That's shocking on its own, isn't it? Deteriorating plant threatens mass extinction around the world. Around the world. That's why I got another die-off video I'm probably going to do tomorrow night, ready to go. Government says 1,500 tons of highly radioactive sludge may end up as soil for gardening. So 50,000 tons, rather, of sludge. Do you know what the sludge is? From water treatment facilities, from the water reclamation, your water filtration plant for your drinking water in just one community. At 89,000 becquerels per kilogram. This is absurd. 50,000 one-ton bags of sediment from the water reclamation facility, far away from the Fukushima, by the way. And so you can't filter radiation very good at these sediment plants, water reclamation centers. It's just a fraction of a percent. And you got 90,000 becquerels per kilogram. And a becquerel is atomic decay per second. This is absurd numbers, in other words. The dust in Tokyo at 4,000 becquerels a kilogram. You had Northern Hemisphere buried, literally buried in radioactive fission products. And that's forever. That's never going to go away. 1 million becquerels in one study of xenon-133. Come on, computer. Don't do that. Don't do me like that. Oh, I've done it twice today. 20 million particles of radioactive iodine-131 in another study per liter. Like, these are absurd numbers. And it's not just going to be iodine-131. There's going to be hundreds of similar numbered products there. 220 million atoms per liter of 129 was a Canadian study, and from Ottawa, capital of Canada. These are absurd numbers. But it's only 1.3 sieverts a liter at the actual nuclear meltdown, Dana. Unit 2, completely liquefied, 100% liquefaction of a uranium core. 100% liquefaction of a uranium core. A 100% liquefaction. Because I had to crash my system before I went live tonight, which is extraordinary. I lost some of the material I had ready, so give me a second. See if I can re-find it. Okay. Okay, well, let's do that. We'll just move on here. 225 sieverts per hour next door at number 1, but it's only 1.2 sieverts at number 2. Rapid meltdown happened at reactor number 2. And over half the fuel melted out of reactor number 2. But it actually burnt continuously for several days. Well, the only way that happens is if the pool went dry, which had decades of reactor cores, and that melted down. Western Tokyo may have been contaminated when the radiation plume fell to the ground after number 2 core was exposed. TEPCO says increase of radioactive releases is from workers going in and out of reactor 2. Literally, the stupidest thing you could possibly say is that statement right there. There ain't nobody going in and out of number 2, and there wasn't at the nuclear meltdowns, my goodness. Potential global catastrophe from Fukushima Unit 2 highly radioactive fuel. Reactor could be destroyed, making Tokyo uninhabitable. Already partially liquefying below the reactors. New TEPCO data unequivocally shows ongoing criticalities of number 2. And container of number 2 reactor no longer sealed, French nuclear authorities. New TEPCO data unequivocally shows a criticality. Radioactivity of millions of sieverts or times usual level number 2. It would be like Chernobyl on a steroid if the spent fuel catches fire. Each reactor holds 3,450 assemblies at the top of the building. Each reactor top pool holds 3,450 fuel rod assemblies, so 4 buildings there are gone. And they had more than that because they don't have a repository anywhere on the planet, let alone Japan. So the pools are stuffed. These are absurd numbers. And but they're claiming there's only 900 tons. Each assembly is 1,800 pounds. And they're claiming all the reactors only have 900 tons in them. But those were the biggest reactors on the planet. The actual reactors themselves hold 800 tons. And they were running at full blast at the time. So they faked reactor 3, they faked reactor 4, now they're faking reactor 2. And damage at unit 2 is what prompted TEPCO to discuss evacuating the workers. Perhaps because the reactor burned continuously for several days, as the NRC admits, and the Freedom of Information shows that too. Each reactor holds 3,400, let's do that again for everybody, assemblies. I'll bring it up on the screen for you. 3,450 assemblies. But remember, the pools were actually stuffed, right? So 3,450 assemblies. Each assembly is 100 fuel rods at 18 pounds each. So around 1,800 pounds for assembly. 6.2 million pounds times 4 buildings equal 24 million. Okay, wait for it. And then you had the common spent fuel pool with 6291 fuel rods. 6291 fuel rods. So 6291, 6291 times 1,800 assemblies, or 1,800 pounds each, plus 24.8 million, plus 24 and 8, 40. Now, these buildings were stuffed because they don't have a repository anywhere. So that's 36 million pounds. Okay, so each reactor holds 800 assemblies times 1,800 pounds. Okay, so now they were stuffed. It was double that. But just on that number, 1.4 million pounds would be a maximum. So 36 million divided by 1.4 million. It was much more than that. I gotta go back one. It's 25 reactor cores. So Chernobyl was a 200-ton reactor, and Chernobyl was mostly graphite. Fukushima's reactors were the biggest in the world at the time. They were pure uranium, pure plutonium, each reactor, by the way. But one reactor was mixed oxide fuel. It was 1 billion times more toxic because it was reclaimed uranium, plutonium, and hot particles from nuclear fuel that they sent away to France and sell it to La Hague in France and Sellafield in the United Kingdom, right? But the reality was the fuel pools and the common spent fuel pool were stuffed because they don't have a repository. So it was probably double that. But we're talking about pure uranium, pure plutonium. And we're talking about mixed oxide fuel for reactor number 3. So the inventory is significantly larger than what I'm talking about. So the inventory is equal to thousands of reactor cores, typical, like compared to Chernobyl. But the problem was that these are meltdowns, and so they're consuming steel and rock and rebar. They're pouring water down on 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. That's atomized in aerosol, ionized and radiated. All the steel and rebar and rocks that fall down on top of it, ionized or atomized in aerosol, ionized and radiated and released in invisible plumes. And so like the steam coming out of the ground is another way to think of this, where it's not just like a detonation of a bomb going off, it's continuing emissions. And so a nuclear bomb goes off, its plume is not going to look like this covering the entire planet with radioactive fallout. Because Japan, it's a continuous plume. So think of a bomb blowing up and the plume is moving across the sky. With a meltdown, it's continuously coming up and fills up the northern hemisphere with an invisible snowstorm of radioactive fallout. So it's equal to tens of thousands of nuclear power plants, reactor cores, because it's a perpetual machine. It's actually a perpetual machine. It'll split atoms for millions of years. That meets the definition of a perpetual motion, see? And that emission, now all fuel pools at all reactor buildings across the entire planet are doing this, are emitting, still splitting the atom, still hemorrhaging out radiation. So there's no way to avoid killing the planet. We are going to kill the planet. We are well on our way to killing the planet, and I've done the research expeditions that show that, right? Japan eyes disposal abroad of radioactive plant equipment. So there's a story on my site I put up of John Kretchen. You'll see a picture of John Kretchen. A couple of weeks ago, it's a repost from the site they took down a few weeks ago with 24,000 subscribers with no emails or nothing, just yank, goodbye, you don't exist, 12 years of work gone, a decade of hardcore research gone, 1,600 presentations gone, and no explanation, right? So we started up this new site, and I'm censored. I mean, I got 190 views on last night's video, for goodness sakes. It's absurd. Japan eyes disposal abroad of radioactive plant equipment, not just from Fukushima, but all plants that they're going to be allegedly decommissioning. Now, it's going to, each of the plants, other plants outside of Fukushima Prefecture, they're planning on decommissioning, are going to take them 40 to 60 years. But the nuclear meltdowns are going to do that in 30 to 40 years. Sounds stupid, because it is. Because that's all they do. They're not going to do nothing. They're just going to lie to you until you go away. And most people have. Export regulations will review to allow for export of low-level radioactive waste. Well, if it's low level, just keep it there. When certain conditions are met, such as their safe recycling into useful resources. My God. That's what I mean. You got no checks and balances. You got no regulatory. They've been captured a long time ago. And they're gone insane on us. They actually hate us. They hate all the species. They hate you and your children. Nuclear plant operators decided to decommission 24 reactors, including 6 units at the crippled Fukushima No. 1 nuclear power plant. And so there's a lot of evidence to suggest that 5 and 6 melted down too. Excluding the reactors of Fukushima plant, the decommissioned unit will produce an estimated 165,000 tons of just what they call low level. It's not high level, it's low level. Low level is still deadly. This is why they got to change the laws. This is why they're trying to export it out of their countries. If it was benign and innocuous and harmless, they wouldn't try to do that, right? But more than 90% of that waste is nowhere to go for dismantling and disposal. Japan still lacks a dedicated disposal site. So does every other country on the planet, by the way. For equipment used at nuclear plants, forcing plant operators to store the waste at their facilities, which I alluded to earlier. They don't have a repository for the high-level fuel, so they keep it in the pools. The pools are stuffed way past their designs. Each building has two. The ministry also says the storage of the out-of-service equipment is getting in the way of the decommissioning process. Well, the homeless said it, not the nuclear industry. They're not at Fukushima. Experts say some businesses in the United States and Sweden clean. You can't clean nuclear contaminated metal. My God, boy. You clean it by grinding it down and releasing that into the environment, releasing all that radiation into the environment. It's not cleaning. That's a catastrophic event. Melt and recycle metal from radioactive waste set by foreign countries. And under the Joint Convention on the Safety of Spent Nuclear Fuel Management, the Joint Convention on the Safety of Spent Fuel Management and the Safety of Radioactive Waste Management, signatory nuclear countries that produce radioactive waste are obliged in principle to dispose of it within their territories. We've got all kinds of examples of them. Sending fuel, like Australia shipping fuel away to France, to La Hague, and they make mixed oxide fuel. The rest of it they ship back to Australia. The same thing for Japan going on right now, by the way, from Sellafield, United Kingdom. They can export the waste as exceptional cases if they obtain the consent of countries where business partners are based. These are corporations you're talking about, and they got illegal rights called corporate personhood. That's piggybacked in on the slavery law illegally. So what happened was slaves were given human rights. They made an amendment to the American Constitution originally, and that was followed by the Bill of Rights in Canada making amendments, and Magna Carta in United Kingdom making amendments. What happened originally was slaves were given rights. That was put into an amendment of the American Constitution. Then that particular amendment then was utilized to give corporations human rights. And so Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black in the 1940s had wrote an eloquent dissent saying how absurd it was that an amendment meant to free slaves from an oppressive government was being used by corporations to oppress a sovereign people. Because corporations changing the charters to give themselves human rights in increments over decades with corporate lawyers with no objections and no one to challenge them. Corporations had a charter. The charter said where they can exist, how long they can exist, where their perimeters were, what their liabilities were. And if they broke their charters by injuring people or they're destroying the community or polluting rivers, you can arrest the holders of the company, like Mark Zuckerberg or whoever owns Google now, whatever. You'll be able to arrest them, right? And liquidate the company to pay restitution to the employees and outstanding shareholders and debt holders would get their money, and the rest of the money would go to remediate the damage that they had done. But by changing that illegally, which is still illegal, you can still change it back, corporations ended up with human rights. It's called corporate personhood. And so Google, or Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg can't go to jail. The shareholders can't go to jail. Those types of corporations are not supposed to have human rights because there's no incentive not to be evil, right? It's the same thing for Google or aka Alphabet, etc., or Twitter. And Twitter, by the way, was funded entirely by the CIA and the FBI. Wrap your mind around it. I covered it years ago. I still have the video that I produced of it here. They actually put out a lecture, a presentation talking about it. But long story, and my apologies, I didn't mean to go down that path, but corporations can be challenged. So we can't hold the nuclear industry accountable because Congress doesn't have the authority to make it illegal to poison, to make it a crime to poison somebody by radiation. Only the NRC can do that. Who, by the way, are oversteered by Congress, who don't have the authority to make it themselves, that law. It's not convoluted, it's stupid. Plan to outsource disposal of large radioactive equipment to oversee. So what we need is people to raise their children that go challenge that amendment to the Constitution that give corporations human rights. Because an illegal amendment is not legal, right? All corporations are supposed to work with a charter. And the charter is designed to hold them accountable. If you can't hold them accountable, there's no incentive for them not to murder all the species and all the humans on the planet and contaminate everything. Plans to outsource disposal of large radioactive equipment to overseas. So they're talking about all the steam generators are highly radioactive. The casks for storing, shipping nuclear fuel are highly radioactive. They want to recycle that into forks and knives and toys for your children. However, Japan's Foreign Exchange and Foreign Trade Control Law bans such exports. And utilities have pressed the government for a change in the disposal policy, and the industry ministry has been reviewing the existing setup alongside experts on nuclear technology, but they refuse to name these people, always. They usually refuse to put a name on these stories too, right? Although the ministry intends to follow the principle of doing away with the waste from Japan, within Japan, it plans to approve exports of 3 types of nuclear plant equipment on conditions that they'll be recycled. Now that shouldn't surprise you when it comes to Japan, because they're growing food in the radioactive wasteland and shipping it worldwide to poison people. So there's no big supplies. They want to take radioactive material and recycle it into stuff that will poison people also. There is no incentive not to be evil for them. On conditions that they will be recycled. The very epitome of, we're not going to export the radioactive material unless you're going to recycle it and put it in people's homes. That's some smurfed up thinking there, okay? That's one of the most dangerous sentences imaginable. We're not going to ship the radioactive material unless they recycle it and use it for something else that people are going to be radiated with. The actual cost these Japanese companies would have to pay to recycle overseas is still unknown. Bill could be far more expensive than estimated, and always is. How to safely ship the radioactive contaminated equipment abroad is another. So it's so dangerous, and how do you ship this dangerous stuff abroad? And then we want to recycle it and use it in the people's spoons and toys and equipment. Schizophrenic. All they think about, apparently, that we can find is how can they be more evil? This is all we ever see in the nuclear industry. What can we do? Can we grow food right in the exclusion zone and then sell that worldwide? Yeah? Well, that's perfect. Let's do it. In fact, the bags, the 30 million one-ton bags that they picked up of radiation, they're now growing food. They're splitting it open and growing food in it. But it gets worse than that. They dumped it in a radioactive exclusion like Okuma and Futaba, right? These communities that are completely abandoned. So they leveled out a spot there that's incredibly radioactive. Then they dumped the incredible radioactive soil that they picked up there, and then added grown food in it. Try making that up on your own. I dare you. Double dare you, actually. How to safely ship the radiation containment equipment abroad is an unresolved issue, but they're only going to do it in conditions that are going to be recycled. So first off, all of Tokyo should be put in a nuclear waste dump. 18 million becquerels a square meter after it rained. Pneumonia cases surged in Japan. Well, there's 1,800 illnesses and diseases will show up, not just cancer. But in 2012, there was an extra 865,000 cancers across Japan. And 14.2% of neonates and infants born need open heart surgery per 100,000. That's 14,200 children, and neonates and infants, need open heart surgery when they're born out of every 100,000 children. Wrap your mind around that. That's absurd. This is unprecedented. 6 in 10 Fukushima children with diabetes. Don't care. 13,646 out of 40,000 children with tumors for the thyroids. Pre-Fukushima was 1 to 2 per million. Well, that's because they had 54 nuclear power plants, right? Fukushima aims to attract new residents and to the abandoned ghost town. A sign gives notice of decontamination and building demolition area categorized as difficult to return within Futaba, which is 2 kilometers away from the nuclear meltdowns. The central and local government, which is the industry itself, have begun encouraging people from outside Fukushima Prefecture to move into areas surrounding the Fukushima #1 nuclear meltdowns. That'll be going on for 10,000 years or more. Hoping that new residents will revive the area. This is what they say just to make them feel good, maybe, right? The central government plans to lift evacuation orders in all areas categorized as difficult return zones, so residents wishing to return to their homes can do so within 2020s. However, in areas where such an order has already been lifted, residents have been slow to return. So 300 newcomers sought this year. 300 newcomers, a long way to contribute to the reconstruction of Fukushima, said this weirdo who's an engineer. He wants to set up a business there because you get 23,000 Canadian to do it. And the central government, which is the goblins, financial support system begins in July, encouraging him to move in, grants 2 million yen to those who move into 12 municipalities near the nuclear plant from outside the prefecture, and additional funds of 4 million yen will be paid if they launch a business, and the government's goal is to bring in 300 new people this year. So they talk about minima soma. Vacant houses will be renovated into rental houses. The vacant houses, you're talking about 1 million becquerels outside Minima Soma City Hall. But you're talking about 10 million becquerels typical of cesium detected in Minima Soma soil samples. We get a lot of headlines about that. So that whole community is nasty. It's a terrible thing to do, to put somebody in that environment. This is what I mean by the nuclear industry doesn't have any rationale whatsoever. They don't have anybody there that have emotions. You can't have emotions, and you can't care about species in order to work for some reason. I don't understand why they're like that outside of That's why they're like that. Behind the move is the slow return of residents areas where the evacuation orders were lifted. The Reconstruction Agency, which is the nuclear industry, and others surveyed the residents of 5 towns, including Fukushima and Kuma, which are on both sides of nuclear meltdowns, and found that only 10% were foolish enough to return. The reactors are still melting down. It's only the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society there. So, Fukushima and Kuma, by the way, they share the Fukushima boundaries. They're joined onto the boundaries of the plant because they're big facilities, right? The town of Nami, which was brutally radioactive, where the evacuations orders were partially lifted. Imagine partially. Some of the town is safe where you can't cross the street because it's not safe. But if you fly over the city, 1,000 feet above it, with Geiger counters, you can read the radiation. But you can't cross the street. But you're okay on the other side of the street. This is nonsense. In fiscal 2019, 70 people in 49 households moved into the town from outside the prefecture, thanks in part to the presence of factories opened by 10 bizarre companies. What a cruel thing to do, eh? Set up your company in a nuclear wasteland. But the population is still only about a tenth of its pre-disaster. Disaster. I don't think calling it a disaster really does it justice. The only way to keep the town going is to further increase the number of new arrivals, commuting, restoring. So people who have rebuilt their lives in the areas to which they evacuated will have the option of having residences in both locations. So you can stay where you moved to, but you can set up a residence there, and then you're magically got to increase the population there. So every facet of the story is bizarre, isn't it? A 66-year-old man moved his family to Hitachi Biragi Prefecture. Says he would need to repair his now dilapidated home, but his home obviously is incredibly radioactive. That's what I mean. Like, there is no checks and balances. There is no regulatory. There is nobody who cares. And in order to return to the home, he would have to repeat it. Now, his children found jobs in Ibaragi, but he grows vegetables in rented fields. So, if nuclear industry had any kind of a soul, any kind of emotion, it would never allow stuff like that, right? You would never be allowed to grow food in a nuclear wasteland. So he said, I have no choice but to spend 2 hours each way to and from Fukushima. But they picked up millions of one-ton bags outside of Fukushima Prefecture too. Tokyo was 200 plus kilometers away, was incredibly radioactive. They should have abandoned all 14 prefectures, northern prefectures, from Tokyo all the way, and all northern prefectures. In a survey conducted last fiscal year by Fukushima, which is the nuclear meltdown, and Akuma, which is the other side of the nuclear meltdown, 60% said they wanted to maintain ties with their hometowns, but that's because they don't understand it's not safe there for hundreds of thousands of years. Because the industry has put a lot of effort into disinformation. So it's incredible that 60% would say they wanted to maintain ties to a nuclear wasteland. The evacuation orders for Naraha was lifted in 2015. Is on the other side of Kuma, which is joined to the hip of the nuclear meltdowns themselves, the community. The number of residents in town level off to 50% of the population. So they managed to manipulate a lot of people into going to that radioactive nuclear wasteland. The town aims to raise the figure by 60% in 2030 to 5,100 people by subsidizing train fares for residents who live in 2 locations. So if you will go on the registry and say you also live here, we'll pay for your travel expenses on the train that has to go through a nuclear wasteland to get to a nuclear wasteland. So that's cruel to send people back into a nuclear wasteland. That's heartless, and it shows an incredible contempt for you and your loved ones and all the species on this planet, yeah? And those who want to go home someday will become important people for the cover up. A sociology professor at Tokyo Metropolitan University, Yosuke Yamashita, that person is... I notice a lot of the times people at the university, the majority of professors we encounter are not professors, they're controlled opposition. Their job is to look like a credible source of documentation information. But when it comes to the nuclear industry, they'll literally go around and stab all the children and ask them why they're bleeding after. The central and local government should continue to provide assistance. Well, it's like, first off, if the truth came out, the nuclear industry would die immediately, what they're actually doing. The nuclear industry can't survive with the truth. If you shine a light on the nuclear industry, all the rats will scurry immediately into dark corners. Should continue to provide, and it's all rats for some reason. That's all we ever come across. It's too bad. They ruined it for the planet, for everybody and all the species. For the perspective of reconstruction by commuting. TEPCO bundles the placement of 100 fire detectors at they got this other nuclear power plant where there's one reactor they're allowed to run. They're going to decommission Daiichi and decommission the Dani plants. And this one, the Kashiwazaki-Kariwa nuke plant in Niigata, which is huge radioactive wasteland, Niigata Prefecture. Tokyo Electric Power Company has continued its bumbling ways. So even the media now is just kicking this. There is no such thing as a TEPCO, right? It was nationalized. You went bankrupt immediately. And the federal government in Japan, which is kooky as it gets, has taken over. In the latest incident, 100 fire detectors were not placed in locations set under safety regulatory regulations. New Jersey calling in. Yeah, hello.
Hello, Dana.
Yeah, that's Dana. I'm live.
This is William. I just want to thank you for your tireless work.
You're welcome.
Somebody needs to pay attention to some of the things that you're saying because they're very important.
Right, yeah. Thank you, William. William's in New Jersey. We talked before, and we're live here right now. You know that, right, William?
You're what?
I say we're live here right now. You're actually live.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to call. I thought you were finished with the show. Okay, I don't want to keep you. I just wanted to.
That's okay. Yeah, I put that number out so you can call in during the show or after the show. It's all good. Thank you, William. No, I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Have a great day and a good show.
God bless. You're welcome, my friend. Thank you again now. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, hugs for you. Bye-bye. I just wanted to thank you for all the work. Thank you, William. In the latest incidents, 100 fire detectors were not placed in locations. But how many fire detectors do they have at this site? There's 2,000 detectors throughout the nuclear plant. It's not dangerous at all, Dana. The company, aka TEPCO, which is aka the nationalized Japanese, reported to the nuclear watchdog on September 16 that more than cases. So the TEPCO is in charge of finding their mistakes, not the NRC. Get it? What's the point of having a nuclear regulatory if they're not going to be regulatories? You're going to say, hey, go out and see if you find any flaws and then get back to us, will you? No, there's nothing dangerous about that. Let's all go over to Unit 2 and have a cup of tea, maybe. Yeah. Yeah, a little stress here tonight. we're still not raising any money. I don't know how long this is going to go on. Hope this is not a new thing, because we're out of business if this keeps going this way. We're running out of business right now. If we don't raise money, I'm going to have to do something drastic in order to fund this operation. Well, I knew this when they took down my other site a few weeks ago, right? When I was out 450 kilometers away doing a species count, and there's no insects, there was no flocks of birds flying, no fish jumping, there was no spiders in the woods, there's no ants in the hills anymore. All the mounds are there, but there's no spiders or ants in them. And all the birds are emaciated on the coastline. And I can't work on the engine. I can't keep up with the expenses anymore. And so I don't know what to do anymore. All I can do is just do the best I'm doing, but I don't think that's fair, right? The planet deserves somebody out there in a position where they can fight back. I can't fight back, right? I can't fight back, and there's no opposition to the industry. And so I don't got a right to take any time off. And because it takes a fortune to run this operation, right? Now we got a broken down boat, and we can't repair that, get that working, because it costs us money. It don't cost a fortune, just costs us money, right? I guess I'll have to do a fundraiser every day next week, maybe. I moved into a small apartment now because it's cheaper, right? And it's hell he's trying to find places for everything. Yeah, I agree with James Olhan, no more expeditions, yeah. But that's the only way I can keep my sanity, is you got to do the species counts, right? Otherwise, how can you tell that story? You got to try, right? That's the problem. You got to. I'm not doing it because it's fun. There's no fun in what I'm doing. I'm not doing it because it's easy, because it's not. And we got the majority of the equipment. I hear you, though. I do hear you, for sure, right? Yeah, that's what I'm basically going to have to do, is just concentrate on the broadcast, James. You're right, 100%. I agree with you. Talking to James in the comments section. Like, ideally, I would have a team. I would have enough money coming in. I can hire people to go out and do species counts, and I keep the that was always the plan, right? But everything landed on my shoulders. We weren't able to keep the operation moving forward. Because I always treated this operation as if it was going to grow into a big operation where we can challenge the industry and hold it accountable each day in a 24-hour cycle. But turns out all that work goes on my shoulders, which is okay, because that got me up. That keeps me in second gear. Yeah. Anyway, a short show tonight for a change. I had a tough day. Last 3 days have been really, really tough on me. Hopefully next week it gets a bit better for me. But I'm in good spirit. I'm working as hard as I can. I'm doing the best I can. I'll come and say goodnight to those that happen to be in the comments section. And everybody else, hugs for everybody that's watching this. Hope everybody's doing good. And for everybody else that's watching it later and tomorrow and that stuff like that, thank you for watching. James Megan, David Allen, James Lucid. Thank you, James. Lucid. Awesome. Anna C. James Olhan. Scott Brady. Dana Nasana. Hi, Dana. I hope you're doing okay with her, man. Poor Dana's been under so much stress out there where all the fires are too. Tim Norris. Hi, Tim. Thank you, everyone. I'll just say goodnight to everybody. We'll call it a show. I'm going to do something unusual tonight. I'm going to sit on the couch, watch a couple of movies. And I'm going to have a pillow and a blanket there in case I can just drop right there on the couch. I only served one king. Thank you, everybody. Chuck Sands, Wolf Mango, Charles Sands, Chuck Sands, I said, did I? Is on a road trip. Jeffrey Brown is on a road trip too, I think. And if I miss anybody, my apologies. I haven't got it. Warren Buffett, Warren. I'm just going up through the comments. I'll come back down to the most recent comments. Port Angeles. Angelica, you're welcome. Andrew B, hi Andrew. Andrew B is CFINSTR. In case his other account got blocked for some reason. He wasn't able to use it and he had to create a new account. His other account used to be his name, Andrew. Christian Boyce. Daryl Murray. Chad. Darlene Perot. There we go. Meta World Peace. Thank you. Ella. Yeah, good night, Ella. Yep, thank you, Lori. Nirad Yeloff. Did I get everybody? There we go. We'll call it a night. It's a hard show tonight. Just getting everything in order. Trying to tell that story. It's all good. See everybody tomorrow night. I think tomorrow night we're going to cover a lot on Australia. About other nuclear news and Fukushima news if it shows up at the same time. Yeah, thank you, everybody. God bless. Hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Hopefully I'm on time. I've only been late maybe 7 times in the last 10 years anyway, but that's not bad, is it? It's always been a good excuse. Never late by very much. I don't think I've ever been early. No, one time I actually showed up early. I accidentally clicked live and I didn't know I was going live. That was crazy. God bless. Hugs for everybody. See everybody tomorrow night. Have a great night. It's the nuclear proctologist signing off.